3.2. This is perfect squares, perfect cubes, and their roots. Okay, so in grade 9, actually grade 8, you guys learn all about what perfect squares are and perfect cubes. So remember, a perfect square, these are all the perfect squares on this side. They're perfect squares because they're essentially a number multiplied by the same number. So here, 3 squared equals 9. Remember what 3 squared is. That's just 3 times 3. 4 times 4 equals 4 squared, which is 16. So that's a perfect square. Perfect cube's a little different. Okay, this is 3 times 3 times 3, which is 3 cubed, and that equals 27. So all of these guys on this side here are perfect cubes. Okay, now you might go, you know what, Mr. Scaber, I already know how to use my calculator to find these. Well, we want to know how to find these without a calculator, of course. Okay, so we can actually use prime factorization to determine if something's a perfect square or cube. Okay, when you're trying to figure out if something's a perfect square, what you want to do is, can I group numbers into groups of 2? If you're doing a perfect cube, you're asking yourself, can I group them into groups of 3? Can I group into groups of 3? Okay, so let's kind of test how to do this. So determine if 1764 is a perfect square. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to prime factorize. So I'm going to start prime factorizing this by dividing by 2. And I'm going to pull up my calculator here. Okay, so I don't know why I keep doing that. So 1764 dividing 2, that gives me 182. I can divide that by 2, and that gives me 441. Okay, let's try and divide this by 3. Look at that. So 3, then 147, and I'm going to try and divide that by 3 again. Are you always going to get it on the first try? No. Okay, but sometimes you just get lucky and you guess a few answers one after another. I'm going to divide this by 7, and that gives me 7. Okay, so now I have prime factorized this whole thing. So 1764, well, that equals 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 7 times 7. Now at this point, what you want to do is, again, if you're trying to figure out if it's a perfect square, you're grouping into groups of 2. So these 2's I can group into a group of 2. There's 2 3's, and then there's 2 7's. Okay, so that means I'm going to take one of these things. So my square root of 1764, well, that's going to be, I shouldn't put an equal sign, that's going to be 1 2 times 1 3 times one of these 7's. So 2 times 3 times 7 gives me 42. Okay, so let's check. That means 42 squared, 42 times 42 should equal 1764. So let's check that over here on the calculator, and it sure does, 1764. Now the reason that's kind of happening is, if you think about it, we can represent all of this, okay, as 2 squared times 3 squared times 7 squared, okay? Or you can represent it, and this makes a little bit more sense, by 2 times 3 times 7 multiplying 2 times 3 times 7, right? This 2, this 3, and this 7 over here, this 2, this 3, and this 7 over here, and recognize this equals 42, and this equals 42. So that's your square. So it is a perfect square, okay? And the square root of 1764 equals 42. Okay, let's go on to example 2 here. Determine if 450 is a perfect square. So the same thing, can I group it into perfect groups of 2? So let's start here. I'm going to divide this by 10. So 450 divided by 10 gives me 45. I'm going to focus on this 10 first. So this is 5. 10 divided by 5 is 2. I'm going to divide this by 5, and that's going to give me 9. And then I can divide these by 3. Okay, so 450 prime factorized is 5 times 5 times 3 times 3 times 2. Okay, 5 times 5, 3 times 3, and then times 2. Let's just make sure that's right before we move forward. Oh, that's the wrong number. There should be 3, and this should be 3. So that works. Now, is this thing a perfect square? Well, let's try. Let's try and group all the same numbers into groups of 2. So I can group 5 and 5 here. I can group 3 and 3. But check it out. I have an odd number out, 2. Okay? So since I have an odd value out, can't group into a group of 2, that's an issue. Okay, so this thing, that means this is not a perfect square. Okay, and we can check. Use your calculator to check. If I take the square root of 450, I'm saying it's not a perfect square, so I'm going to assume that this won't work. So remember, second x squared, so you're getting that little square root button there, 450, and in fact, it is a really ugly decimal number. Okay, so that doesn't quite work there. So it looks like this is not a perfect square, and that would be my answer. Okay, because we couldn't group everything nicely. Now moving ahead, finding if something's a perfect cube is very similar, but we're not going to group it into groups of 2. We're going to try and group things into groups of 3. Okay, and remember, they have to be the same number. So let's start over here, 2,744. So the first thing I'm going to do is divide this by 4 and see if that works. So this will be 2,744 divided by 4. That gives me 686. I'm going to focus on this 2 over here because I can divide 2 out, and that gives me 2. 686, well, I can divide 2 out of that, and that gives me 343. Now 343 is kind of an awkward number. Let's try and divide it by 3. So 343 divided by 3. Okay, that doesn't work. So let's try and see if 6 works. That doesn't work. Let's try if 7 works. There we go. So sometimes it takes a few tries. So it looks like 343 divided 7 gives us 49. And then over here, 49 is 7 times 7. So 49 divided by 7 gives you 7. Okay. Now, the prime factorization of 2,744 equals 2 times 2 times 2 times 7 times 7 times 7. And now, to figure out if it's a perfect cube, again, group things, the same numbers, into groups of 3. So there's a first group of 3 with all these 2s. And there's another group of 3 with all these 7s. And there's no number left out. So my cube, well, I'm going to take one of these 2s and one of these 7s, multiply it. So the cube root of 2,744 is going to be 2 times 7, which gives us 14. Okay, and remember, that's because we can group this up and do 2 times 7 times 2 times 7 times 2 times 7. And that's going to give us 14 here, 14 here, 14 here, and here is 14 times 14 times 14, which is 14 cubed. So what we're really saying is 14 to the power of 3 gives us 2,744, which is what number we were looking for. Okay, so it is in fact a perfect cube. So 2,744 is a perfect cube. Okay. So let's maybe try one more problem over here. 340. So the same thing, we're trying to determine if this is a perfect cube. So let's start dividing. So divide 10 out of here. 340 divided 10 gives us 34. 10 dividing 5 gives us 2. 34 divided 2 gives us 17. 17 is a prime number. You can't divide 17 by anything. Again, you could try a few times, but it'll never work. 17, so that doesn't work. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. And no numbers are going to work here. So, can I group 340's prime factorization into groups of 3? Well, you probably can already tell, no. I don't even have a number that I can group into 3. I only have 2 2s. I have a single 5 and a single 17. So 340 is not a perfect cube. Okay, and we can check that. How do I cube root something in my calculator? So what you're going to do is you're going to press math, and you're going to have an option to do cube root here, which is usually number 4. Okay, your calculator is obviously going to look a little different. And then you can cube root 340, and you're going to get a decimal number. We know that because we can't group anything into groups of 3. Okay, and you have numbers all left out. Okay, so let's utilize this in some word problems here. So use prime factorization and determine the surface area of a cube if the volume is 12,167 cubic feet. Okay, so first of all, our volume equals 12,167 cubic feet, which is feet cubed. Okay, understand that we're talking about a cube. What does a cube look like? So a cube is something where all the side lengths are the same shape. Not shape, but same length. So this is x, and this is x. Remember, the volume of a rectangular prism is length times width times height. Recognize here, my length, my width, and my height are all the same thing. So this is essentially x times x times x. So that will be x cubed. Okay, because we're multiplying x 3 times, that's x cubed. So here, if we can't use our calculator, we have the volume, we want to find the side length, because in order to find the surface area, we need the side length. So how can we do that? Well, what we can do is we can say 12,167 feet cubed equals x cubed, okay? And now that it equals x cubed, we can determine the side lengths, okay? So our side lengths, we are going to be able to figure out because we're going to see if this thing's a perfect cube, which I'm going to assume it is. So let's prime factorize this thing. So this looks like kind of a hard number to divide by any number, so let's hope it divides by some number here. So let's start here. 12,167, okay, and I'm going to divide that by 3. That's not going to work. 12,167 dividing, let's go 7. That doesn't work. 12,167 dividing 13. 67 dividing, I don't know, 17. 1. So let's just try here, math. Cube root. 67. Okay. So we could keep trying these numbers. 12,167 dividing 23. So there we go. There's a lucky number. 23 here. That gives us 529. I'm going to try and divide this by 23 again. And that gives me 23 as well. Recognize 23 is a really big prime number. 23 can't be divided by anything else. So here, I know that I can group this into a group of 3, and this is 23 cubed equals 12,167 feet cubed. So there is our x. right? A number multiplied by itself 3 times equals this. We figured that out using prime factorization. So x equals 23. Now we can figure out the surface area of this cube. Now let's talk about the surface area of this cube. So remember what the area of a square is. It's essentially x squared, right? Because length times height, well, they're the same value in a cube. Now here, how many of the same shapes do we have for this area? Well, we have 1, the top is 2, the sides are 3 and 4, the back is 5, and the bottom is 6. So we have 6 total sides. So the area of the cube will equal 6 times the area of a single square. So 6 times x squared. And this is because there's 6 sides. So our area of this cube will equal 6 times, and we're going to take our x, which we figured out to be 23 squared, and we're definitely going to need a calculator for that. So 23 squared times 6 gives us 3,174. And what would be the units here? Well, we're talking about it in feet, so this will be feet squared since it's area. Okay, so hopefully that was that all made sense. And if you have any questions, please come ask. Get some help from your teacher if things are confusing. Okay, but remember and understand how to find if some number is a perfect square or perfect cube using prime factorization. Okay, because it'll be definitely very useful later on in other chapters here.